The bread hit the tray with a thud, dry, cold, alone. The water that followed wasn't in a glass, but a flimsy plastic cup, slapped down as if for a stray dog. "This meal fits you," the flight attendant muttered. And just like that, a $9 billion merger found its trigger. No one on Flight 762 from Los Angeles to New York knew that the quiet black man in Seat 2A was about to change everything. He didn't wear a power suit. No diamond cufflinks, no Rolex gleamed beneath his sleeve. Just a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and limited edition sneakers, the kind you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. But that was Malcolm Hayes' specialty, being underestimated. By the time this flight touched down, an entire airline's culture would be under federal review, 3 crew members would lose their careers, and social media would birth a storm that no PR firm could contain. But for now, all Malcolm did was stare at the tray before him, the bread, the water, and the insult that had landed heavier than any turbulence. 9 hours earlier. The first rays of Los Angeles sunlight spilled through the Hayes family's bedroom window. Malcolm zipped up his leather carry-on, methodically checking each pocket. Passport. Contracts. Charger. Emergency presentation drive. He didn't need a checklist, his mind was one. At 42, Malcolm Hayes was already a legend in tech circles. Founder and CEO of Skynova Technologies, his innovations have modernized flight data systems worldwide. But what no one knew, not yet, was that Skynova was about to merge with Altura Air, one of America's largest legacy carriers. This flight to New York wasn't just a business trip. It was a test. A test they didn't know they were taking. Behind him, Camille sat on the edge of the bed, adjusting his collar. Her eyes held that familiar blend of pride and concern. "You sure you want to go through with this anonymously?" she asked. "If I announce who I am, I'll never see the truth," Malcolm replied. "I want to know who they are when no one's watching." A sudden thump echoed down the hall. Moments later, their 10-year-old son Noah burst into the room, pajamas flapping. "Do you have to go, Dad?" he asked, climbing onto the bed and wrapping his arms around Malcolm's waist. "Just a few days," Malcolm said, kneeling to meet Noah eye to eye. "And when I come back, everything's going to be different." "Different, like better?" Noah asked. Malcolm smiled, tucking a curl behind his son's ear. "Better. For all of us." At 7:52 a.m., a black SUV glided to a halt outside their suburban driveway. The driver stepped out and tipped his hat. "Mr. Hayes." "Terminal 4. Malcolm nodded and turned to his family. One last hug. One last kiss. And then, he was gone. The airport hummed with its usual chaos. Luggage wheels clicked like clockwork, announcements echoed overhead, and coffee lines stretched endlessly. Malcolm approached the Altura Air first-class check-in counter. He handed over his platinum status card and ID. The woman behind the counter, mid-50s, rigid smile, tight blonde bob, looked up at him. Her eyes flicked from his hoodie to his skin. Her smile faded. "Coach line is over there," she said, nodding toward a long queue 20 feet away. Malcolm remained calm. "I'm flying first class," he said evenly. A pause. She looked again, this time more carefully, at his ID. Then her fingers flew across the keyboard. Her eyebrows twitched, just barely. "I see. Well, you're confirmed. Gate 18A. Boarding begins in 45 minutes." She handed him his boarding pass with mechanical detachment. "No, thank you. No eye contact." As Malcolm turned away, he caught the micro-expression. That flicker of judgment. That silent, "What's he doing here?" He logged it in his mind. First point of data. Security was no better. A TSA agent waved him to the random screening lane despite his clear pass. A middle-aged couple watched him place his belt and laptop into the bin, whispering behind cupped hands. When he helped an elderly man lift a suitcase, the woman murmured, "He must work here." Malcolm said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that speaking too soon meant they stopped revealing themselves. Better to watch. To listen. At Gate 18A, the first-class lounge welcomed guests with flutes of champagne and soft jazz. A white businessman in a suit was ushered in with a smile. When Malcolm approached, the attendant glanced at his boarding pass, hesitated, then simply said, "Seats are inside." No offer of champagne. No warm smile. He sat anyway. Boarding was called. "First-class passengers and platinum members," the speaker chirped. Malcolm stood, walking past a couple whose eyes narrowed as he passed. "Guess they'll let anyone up front these days," the man muttered. His wife laughed quietly. Malcolm said nothing. Seat 2A. Window. He stowed his bag, sat down, and opened his tablet. Review final terms. Memorize clauses. Prepare for war in the boardroom. And then she arrived. Claudia Rivers. Early 40s. Perfect teeth, strained smile. Flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder and a history, though she didn't know anyone on board could read her file. She paused when she saw Malcolm. Checked her manifest. Then leaned over to her colleague, whispering just loud enough for him to hear, "He's in the wrong cabin." Her voice dripped with disdain. As if she couldn't fathom he belonged in first class. As if the idea of a black man in seat 2A was an error. Malcolm pulled out his phone and took a photo of his untouched seat setup. No welcome towel, no drink, no menu. He messaged Tina, his executive assistant. Audit in progress. Crew failing. Full documentation initiated. Tina replied instantly. Understood. Security feeds live. Proceeding. Then came the meal. Or rather, the insult. No filet mignon. No grilled salmon. No choice. Just a single slice of dry bread, on a plain white plate. And a cup of water, room temperature, was unceremoniously dropped in front of him. No napkin. No cutlery. "This meal fits you," Claudia said with a smirk. Malcolm didn't blink. Instead, he leaned forward, voice low, calm. "Is this the standard first-class offering today?" Claudia shrugged. "We ran out of options." Liar. He lifted his phone and snapped the tray, the bread, his hand and name tag. Across the aisle, a young white woman, early 30s, laptop open, stared in disbelief. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm. "May I see the menu?" Claudia's smile returned, sugary sweet now. "Of course." The woman flipped through the options, then pointed at Malcolm. "Why didn't he get this?" Claudia's eyes narrowed. "Some passengers don't seem to care for fine dining." The woman's jaw clenched. She said nothing more, but her expression screamed, "This isn't over." Neither was Malcolm's documentation. He typed 2 words to Tina. They failed. Sometimes, injustice doesn't scream. It whispers. It smirks. It skips your row and hands you dry bread. And in those moments, power isn't in retaliation, it's in preparation. This was not just a flight. It was a mirror. And Malcolm Hayes was ready to shatter it. He could tolerate the stares. He could stomach the bread. But the one thing Malcolm Hayes could not afford to lose was his composure, because back home in Los Angeles, a little boy believed that dignity was stronger than rage. The cold tray sat in front of him like a loaded weapon. A slice of bread. A cup of water. Nothing more. Claudia had moved on, her heels clicking confidently down the aisle, unconcerned, unbothered, as if what had just occurred was protocol, not prejudice. Across the aisle, the blonde woman stared at Malcolm with a mixture of disbelief and rising fury. Her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating. Should she speak out? Record more? Intervene? Malcolm gave her a brief nod, enough to acknowledge her presence but also a silent request, not yet. Because right now, this wasn't the time for confrontation. It was time for calibration. He exhaled slowly and leaned back in his seat, letting the sting of humiliation pass through him without taking root. He had learned, years ago, that letting those moments live inside you only poisoned your clarity. Instead, he let his mind drift. To his son. To the weight of one promise. 12 hours earlier. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast and fresh orange juice. Camille hummed softly, flipping pancakes on the griddle while Noah, still in his pajamas, sat at the kitchen island, drawing superhero sketches with exaggerated muscles and lightning bolts. Malcolm stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching the peaceful scene before him. These were the mornings he lived for, the rare stillness before the storm of responsibility. You packed everything? Camille asked without turning. Twice, he said, walking over to kiss her on the cheek. You know me. She smiled. I do. That's why I'm asking. Across the island, Noah looked up. Is this trip another boring adult meeting? Very boring, Malcolm replied. But important. Noah frowned. You're always doing important stuff. But I like it better when you just play basketball with me in the driveway. I like that too, Malcolm said, walking over to ruffle his son's hair. But sometimes, to protect the things we love, we have to go fight battles elsewhere. Noah wrinkled his nose. Like superheroes? Malcolm smiled. Exactly like that. Camille flipped the last pancake and set a plate in front of Noah. Eat up, baby. And give your dad a hug before he has to leave. Noah ran around the counter and wrapped his arms around Malcolm's waist. Promise you won't let the bad guys win. Malcolm knelt to eye level. I promise I'll stay calm, stay smart, and fight the right way. And when I come back, things will be better. Not just for us, but for a lot of people. The boy nodded, absorbing every word. And as Malcolm stood, he didn't know yet that those very words, uttered with fatherly confidence, would replay in his mind like a vow when a flight attendant reduced him to a stereotype. Back on the plane, Malcolm stared out the window, watching the clouds slice by like quiet memories. He wasn't just a CEO. Or a merger architect. Or even a frequent flyer. He was a father. And that meant more than just showing up for birthday parties or basketball games. It meant modeling restraint in the face of insult, showing his son that dignity wasn't weakness, it was power under control. He thought of his father. The way he used to say, the angriest man in the room never wins. He just becomes the easiest to blame. Those words had carried Malcolm through boardrooms filled with men who spoke over him, through investor meetings where he'd been asked if he was the intern, and through elevator rides where security assumed he didn't belong. He never yelled. He simply became undeniable. As Claudia skipped his row again during drink service, Malcolm picked up his phone and quietly recorded a 20-second clip. No commentary. Just visuals. The untouched bread. The full water cup. The flight attendant ignored him as she poured champagne for the man behind him. Then he sent it to Tina. Subject, Flight 762, Segment 2. Attachment, IMG_1142.mov. Silent service gap. Pattern consistent. A passenger in 2C just received caviar. Please confirm cabin footage angles. Tina replied less than a minute later. Angles locked. Feed recording at 3 perspectives. Internal tags, crew bias, disparate treatment, escalation point pending. The woman across the aisle, her name tag now visible, Renee Wallace, leaned slightly toward Malcolm. I'm a journalist, she whispered, off duty. But I've never seen anything quite this blatant. Malcolm didn't look up. Not off duty anymore, he said softly. She sat back, understanding that something bigger than an uncomfortable flight was unfolding. This wasn't about bad service. It was about exposure. Meanwhile, Claudia stood near the galley, laughing with Lars, the junior attendant. Their conversation was low, meant to be private, but the cabin acoustics betrayed them. Coach Guy in first class, Claudia muttered. Probably upgraded by mistake. Or charity. Lars gave a nervous chuckle. Maybe he's one of those TikTok influencers pretending to be rich. Claudia snorted. Bread and water's all he needs. Malcolm tapped his tablet again. Recording, active. He thought again of Noah. What would he tell him? How would he explain that being successful, being brilliant, wealthy, accomplished, still wasn't always enough to be seen as human in some spaces? And yet, he would not teach his son to respond with bitterness. He would teach him to build systems that outlasted bias. To gather proof. Speak the truth. And never lose grace. The pilot's voice broke through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be reaching cruising altitude in 10 minutes. Smooth skies ahead. Malcolm let out a breath. The irony wasn't lost on him. Smooth skies above. Turbulence below. Claudia returned to offer more drinks to the rows around him, but again skipped 2A. Renee shifted in her seat, visibly annoyed. Are you going to serve him? She asked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Claudia turned, the veneer of professionalism barely intact. I'll be with him shortly. She never was. Malcolm remained stone still. His tablet now displayed the Skynova audit dashboard, his team's internal tool for covertly evaluating airline performance. 3 red flags blinked on screen. Bias protocol violation. Disparate service pattern. Crew escalation risk, medium-high. Malcolm input a simple note. Recommend classification, pattern bias, visible within 30 minutes of flight initiation. Not isolated. He paused. Then added. Training is insufficient. Reform required. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers began relaxing. Headphones. Laptops. Champagne flutes clinking. Malcolm sat quietly, untouched bread still on his tray table, a symbol of something far deeper than airline catering. Renee leaned in again. Why don't you say something? File a complaint. I will, Malcolm replied. But not as a passenger. She frowned. Then, as what? He looked her in the eye for the first time. The calm beneath his words was unnerving. As the man who's about to own this airline. Grace is not surrender. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes, the most powerful act of resistance is staying composed while building the storm that will bring justice. And as Malcolm Hayes closed his tablet, set down his phone, and calmly leaned back in seat 2A, he wasn't waiting for service anymore. He was waiting for the reckoning. At 36,000 feet, most passengers see clouds. Malcolm Hayes saw everything: crew logs, bias complaints, hidden flight deck chatter. With a few taps, he unlocked a digital map of discrimination, and the names at the center of it all lit up like targets. The cabin hummed with the low lull of altitude and engine. To most, it was just another smooth flight over America. But to Malcolm Hayes, seat 2A had become a command center. While Claudia Rivers continued her soft war of microaggressions, bypassing his row, ignoring his tray, chatting warmly with the white passengers, Malcolm wasn't just enduring it. He was logging it. Recording it. Dissecting it in real time. He reached for his tablet and swiped past his presentation slides. Hidden behind a discreet blue icon was an app that had never been released to the public. Skynova OS, Founders Mode. This wasn't just software. It was power. And Malcolm had built it for moments exactly like this. Within seconds, he was inside the airline's private infrastructure. Crew manifests. Cabin audio feed. Real-time chat between attendees. Complaint logs. And most importantly, personnel histories. First name up, Claudia Rivers. Her profile loaded with a chime. Flight attendant, level 3. 18 years of service. Polished. Certified. Trained in DEI protocols. And yet, Malcolm's eyes narrowed. 3 past complaints from black or brown passengers. One accused her of calling a Muslim man excess baggage. Another claimed she refused to serve a black teenager in first class. A third cited passive aggression and falsified service records. All 3 reports had been marked inconclusive or unsubstantiated. The internal notes were damning in their vagueness. No corroborating witness. No security footage available. He said, she said. Closed. Malcolm added a note to her file. Pattern observed. Investigate false closure culture. Next, he tapped into the live cabin feed. Small hidden cameras, built into the cabin corners for safety, fed real-time visuals to the server. Malcolm toggled to the front-facing cam for row 2. There he was, in a hoodie, tablet in hand, untouched bread in front of him. In frame, Claudia smiled as she offered champagne to the passengers in row 3. He flagged the time stamp. 11:17 a.m. Disparate service, first class exclusion. Second instance. He tapped Save Clip and watched as it encrypted and uploaded to the Skynova cloud. Tina would receive it instantly. A new message appeared on his tablet. Tina Monroe, got it. Adding to the legal bundle. We're cataloging in reverse sequence now. Audio confirms tone of voice when she said, "This meal fits you. Want to tag the cockpit crew next?" Malcolm replied. Yes. Especially Hollander. Start with prior infractions. Captain James Hollander's profile opened with a stark contrast to Claudia's. He wasn't just problematic, he was protected. For internal HR complaints in 7 years. Twice reprimanded for refusing to refer to female first officers by rank. Once for mocking a trans passenger's travel ID. And a high-profile case involving a Haitian family, where he reportedly said over comms, "Not sure they belong in first class. Keep an eye." That report had vanished under a pile of confidential arbitration. Malcolm clicked into the flight's crew comms log, a real-time, internal text thread used by staff. It was limited, but revealing. Lars, passenger 2A not responding to standard offers. Should I escalate? Claudia, no need. Bread and water strategy. He'll get the message. Lars, that feels wrong. Claudia, you want to be reassigned to coach next month? Thought not. Malcolm stared at the screen. There it was. The intent. He screen captured the thread and annotated. Complicity via coercion. Junior staff confirms awareness of bias but complies. This is cultural rot, not isolated behavior. Meanwhile, outside the data world, the flight continued. Claudia returned to the galley and opened her crew tablet. Malcolm watched her through the cabin feed as she pulled up the passenger manifest. He zoomed in. She tapped into seat 2 as record. Her eyebrows knit together. No employer listed. No frequent flyer history. Just platinum status, private entity. She tilted her head and muttered, "What's a nobody doing with this kind of status?" Malcolm's tablet vibrated. A new message from Tina. "We've flagged that she's searching your profile on board. Legal says that's a violation of privacy protocol under FAA Reg 49.382. Continue documenting," Malcolm replied. "Also log, attempted digital profiling." Suddenly, the man in 2C, white, silver-haired, banking elite, leaned toward Malcolm. "I'm sorry," he said with rehearsed sincerity. "But may I ask, what do you do, sir?" Malcolm looked up. He saw it in the man's face, not curiosity, but classification. The type of question that wasn't a question, but a gate. He smiled politely. "I'm in software." "Oh. Startup work, I presume?" Malcolm shrugged. "We've started. And now we're scaling." The man grinned dismissively. "Ah, the grind. Must be thrilling." He offered his hand. "Charles Wellington. Eastland Banking. My firm underwrites most of Altura's quarterly debt." Malcolm didn't take the hand. He simply said, "Malcolm Hayes," and turned back to his screen. Wellington pulled his hand back, the shift in tone clear. Another notch in Malcolm's mental list. Bias doesn't always come in slurs. Sometimes, it arrives in silk ties and disbelieving smirks. Claudia passed through again, this time collecting trays. When she reached row 2, she paused, looked at Malcolm's untouched bread, and said dryly, "Not hungry?" "Just not impressed," he replied. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned away with a visible eye roll. Malcolm tapped a note into his app. Interaction number 6. Open hostility. Confirmed pattern. Meanwhile, Tina messaged again. "We're seeing internal pings from crew devices. Claudia just searched your last name in the company database. Blocked at 2FA. Someone spooked." Malcolm smiled slightly. "Let them spiral." Then he opened the secure file, Case Prep, Culture Cleanse, and added a new folder. Flight 762, Final Evidence Chain. Inside, he placed everything. Video of bread and water. Screen recording of crew chat. Audio clip from galley gossip. Transcript of Claudia's search behavior. Copy of Charles Wellington's dismissive exchange. A living dossier. And soon, a weapon. At 12:38 p.m., a quiet ding sounded. New message from Tina. Cross-reference complete. Claudia and Hollander both listed in prior DEI Reform Committee, 2019 Altura HR Initiative. Outcome. No actions taken. Paper shield. Malcolm tapped out his reply. Begin exit strategy. Notify legal. Notify PR. This audit's complete. But he wasn't done yet. Not until the plane landed. Not until the confrontation was personal. Renee leaned over again. "You're building something, aren't you?" she asked softly. "I'm documenting something that's already built," Malcolm replied. "And it's rotten." She hesitated. "You want help?" "Later," he said. "Once the denial starts." Some battles are not fought with fists or fury, but with data, silence, and evidence that cannot be ignored. In the age of power, truth is digital, N.D. Malcolm Hayes was its quiet architect. Racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears lipstick, a crisp uniform, and a forced smile. Claudia Rivers had spent years hiding behind procedure. But this flight, this passenger, was about to pull off her mask. The air in first class had grown thick, not with turbulence, but tension. Claudia moved through the rows with the performative grace of someone who had rehearsed her customer service smile for years. She laughed when expected, offered wine with just enough warmth, and adjusted blankets with the gentleness of a practiced hand. But her eyes, they told the truth. And they rarely landed on row 2A. Malcolm watched her, each movement recorded not just by his tablet, but by memory. She had served filet mignon to the elderly couple in row 1. Poured sparkling wine for the venture capitalist in 3C. Even brought an extra pillow for a teenage girl traveling with her father in 4A. And yet for him, bread, water, silence. Across the aisle, Renee Wallace, now fully alert in reporter mode, had stopped pretending she was just a casual witness. Her phone, cleverly camouflaged by a book cover, was recording audio from the entire section. She had already texted her editor at the Post. Something's happening on Flight 762. Big. Possibly racial discrimination. May need a legal read on recordings. The reply came quickly. Document everything. Be careful. She looked at Malcolm again. The calm in his posture was unsettling. It wasn't passive, it was purposeful. He wasn't enduring the abuse. He was collecting it. Mid-flight, Claudia returned down the aisle with a tray. She stopped at the seat across from Malcolm and beamed. "Would you care for our featured lunch, miss? Roasted duck confit or wild mushroom risotto?" Renee raised an eyebrow. "Duck sounds lovely. Thank you." Claudia leaned in slightly. "We're also offering a warm fruit tart for dessert. Just let me know." Renee accepted with a gracious nod. But as Claudia turned to go, Renee couldn't help herself. She gestured toward Malcolm's tray. "I'm sorry," she said, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "But has this gentleman been offered the same menu?" Claudia stiffened, just slightly. "We've had some stocking issues today. Limited options." "Really?" Renee said, her voice sharpening. "Because I just watched you serve duck and risotto to 2 passengers behind me." Claudia's eyes flickered. Perhaps he didn't seem interested. Renee's voice dropped. "Did he say that? Or did you decide it?" Claudia said nothing and walked briskly to the galley. Malcolm didn't say a word. Instead, he tapped a quick update into his dashboard. Renee's intervention triggered verbal evasion. Claudia showed visible discomfort. Avoided accountability. Passenger patterns diverging by race. Then he lifted his camera and took a still image of the untouched tray, bread now dry as parchment, the water sweating inside its plastic cup. 10 minutes later, Charles Wellington, the investment banker from earlier, decided to inject himself back into the scene. He leaned toward Malcolm again. "You know," he said, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass, "you should consider being less sensitive. These things aren't always what they seem." Malcolm turned to him slowly. "Meaning?" "Well," Wellington chuckled, "not everything's a race issue. Maybe you just didn't look like you belonged. That happens to me all the time when I wear jeans to first class." Malcolm looked at him, deadpan. "Have you ever been served a slice of dry bread and a cup of water in first class?" Wellington faltered. "Well, no. But what?" The silence between them stretched uncomfortably. "That's what I thought," Malcolm said, turning away. In the galley, Claudia was unraveling. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the metal countertop. She turned to Lars, the younger male attendant, whose guilt had been growing with every skipped row. "You need to cover me," she hissed. "Just tell anyone who asks that the catering messed up." Say he declined the full meal. Lars shook his head slowly. I think this is getting out of hand. Claudia's eyes flashed. Do you want to be reassigned to maintenance flights out of Newark? Because I can make that happen. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Claudia opened her crew tablet and navigated to the service log. Under Passenger 2A, Hayes, Malcolm, she began typing. Refused a full meal. Requested bread and water due to dietary restrictions. She saved the entry and exhaled. But what she didn't know was that every keystroke was being captured by Skynova's audit tool. Seconds later, Malcolm received an alert on his tablet. Unauthorized log modification detected, PX2A. False dietary note added. Time stamped. Alert forwarded to audit team. He smiled grimly. Let her keep digging, he texted Tina. She doesn't know how deep the hole is. Back in the cabin, Claudia returned with a tray for Renee. It was a beautiful spread, duck breast glazed with orange reduction, wild rice, fresh asparagus, and a glass of red wine. Here you are, miss, Claudia said, her voice sugar-sweet. Would you like anything else? Renee stared at her. I'd like to know why you just falsified that gentleman's service record. Claudia froze. I'm sorry. I'm a reporter. I know when someone's writing a false log. I also know it's a federal offense to misrepresent passenger service records during an in-flight audit. Claudia's face turned to stone. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Renee said. I'm stating it. You just lied about his meal. Claudia turned to Malcolm. He hasn't even complained, she snapped. Not yet, Malcolm said quietly. I was giving you time to realize who you were dealing with. Renee looked from Claudia to Malcolm, puzzled. Then he added, still calmly. I'm not just a passenger, Miss Rivers. I'm Malcolm Hayes, CEO of Skynova Technologies. Claudia blinked. The name clicked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. And as of tomorrow, he continued, my company becomes the majority stakeholder in this airline. The color drained from Claudia's face. In the galley, Lars checked his crew messages and saw the alert that had just gone through. Confidential, PX2A is M. Hayes, Skynova CEO. Do not escalate. Comply. Await instructions. He looked up at Claudia, who had backed into the wall, her hand covering her mouth. I told you, Lars whispered. This wasn't just another flight. Renee leaned across the aisle. You've been auditing them this entire time. I gave them a chance, Malcolm said. And they failed. She looked at him with a mixture of awe and admiration. Then what happens next? He looked out the window. Justice, he said. One step at a time. Prejudice hides behind routine. Behind policy. Behind just doing my job. But eventually, someone pulls off the mask. And when they do, the whole theater collapses. And Malcolm Hayes had just brought the curtain down. Claudia thought she'd served her final insult. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man she humiliated wasn't just a passenger. He was the one rewriting their employee handbook. And tomorrow, their names wouldn't be on the roster. The silence in first class waited now. Not the comfortable hush of luxury, but a taut, breathless anticipation. Claudia Rivers stood frozen next to row 2A, her smile gone, her hand tightening around the tray of untouched desserts she'd brought forward in a desperate attempt to repair the irreparable. Her mind raced. Malcolm Hayes. Malcolm Hayes. The name wasn't unfamiliar, it had been floating around in staff emails and HR memos for weeks. Something about a software company buying into the airline. Some vague, corporate merger no one cared about, until now. Until he was sitting in her section. Watching. Listening. Recording. And until she had served him a plate of dry bread and dismissed his humanity as a matter of protocol. Across the aisle, Renee Wallace was already composing headlines in her mind. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, his expression unreadable. His voice was quiet, steady, and lethal. "I gave this airline an opportunity," he said. "I boarded this flight as a nobody. I dressed simply. I said nothing. I waited. And your crew showed me exactly what this culture rewards, and what it ignores." Claudia swallowed hard, her throat tight. I didn't know who you were." "And that," Malcolm said, "is exactly the problem." 2 rows back, Charles Wellington had gone pale. The banker who once waved away Malcolm with a chuckle now gripped his drink like it was a flotation device in a sinking ship. "Wait," he stammered. "You're that Malcolm Hayes? From Skynova?" Malcolm didn't even look at him. But Renee turned. "Oh, now you recognize him?" Wellington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I may have misjudged the situation." "No," Renee snapped. "You judged it exactly as you were trained to. You just didn't expect the judgment to be mutual." In the galley, Lars received the second internal alert. "Priority update, Flight 762, confirmed quality audit. PAX 2A equals CEO Malcolm Hayes. Immediate behavior compliance is required. All crew communications are under review." Lars's stomach dropped. His earlier discomfort curdled into dread. Claudia wasn't just in trouble. They all were. He peeked through the curtain at Claudia, who now stood motionless, her tray trembling slightly. "Do something," she hissed at him under her breath. Lars shook his head. "There's nothing left to do." Back in the cabin, the flight attendant in row 1 made an attempt to reset the tone. "Can I offer anyone a warm towel?" she asked the row ahead. But the words rang hollow. The atmosphere had shifted. Passengers weren't sure how to behave now. Several were checking their phones. Others glanced at Malcolm with a mix of curiosity and discomfort, like someone watching a courtroom drama unfold in real life. And Malcolm? He was as calm as ever. His phone buzzed softly. A message from Tina. "Legal has submitted a pre-litigation brief to Altura Corporate. All cabin data preserved. The media team is preparing a public statement. Hashtag already trending, hashtag bread and water flight." Another alert followed. Employee misconduct timeline reviewed. Claudia Rivers and Captain Hollander were named in 4 prior DEI investigations. All dismissed by the same HR manager. Patterns confirmed. Malcolm forwarded the file to his private legal inbox with 2 words. Noted. Proceed. In the cockpit, Captain Hollander glanced down at the flashing notification on his screen. Alert, KX-2A, Malcolm Hayes, CEO, Skynova. He scowled. "What the hell is he doing on this flight?" he muttered. His co-pilot, a younger man named Thomas, looked confused. "Is that the guy from the software company?" "The guy who's buying our airline," Hollander said bitterly. Thomas went quiet. "Shouldn't we have known? We should have taken him off before takeoff," Hollander growled. "This is going to be a disaster." "Why?" Thomas asked, a hint of unease in his voice. "I mean, unless something's happened." Hollander didn't answer. He was already texting Claudia. "We have a problem. 2A is Hayes. Play it cool." But it was far too late for cool. Meanwhile, Claudia returned once more to row 2A. This time with a new tone, a desperate, cloying version of the fake professionalism she'd worn so comfortably just hours earlier. "Mr. Hayes," she said, voice trembling with effort. "May I offer you a glass of champagne? Or perhaps our premium dinner option?" Malcolm looked at the tray. Then at her. "No need for theatrics now," he said quietly. "What's done is done." She flinched. I just didn't realize." Malcolm held up a hand. "Save it. Intent doesn't erase impact." The words hit harder than any insult. Around them, several passengers listened, pretending not to, but Malcolm's voice carried. And so did the truth behind it. Renee leaned across the aisle, whispering, "That was perfect." "It was honest," Malcolm replied. "And overdue." She hesitated, then asked, "Would you go on record when we land? Tell your side?" "Not yet," he said. "Let them keep digging. The real rot isn't just in this cabin. It's systemic." In the galley, Claudia slumped into a jump seat, her hands shaking. Her crew tablet displayed the same alert again and again. Quality audit in progress. All actions monitored. Internal review pending. She opened the crew communication chat. "Should I apologize again? Try to fix it?" Lars responded immediately. "He has already decided. And he saw everything." Claudia stared at her screen, helpless. In the cockpit, Hollander made one last, desperate call to ground control. "Get legal on standby," he barked. "We may need a press statement ready when we land." But even as he said it, another alert came through. Incident trending on social. #bread and water flight. 70,000 impressions. Influencer on board sharing details. Hollander's jaw clenched. He had lost control of the plane, not its altitude, but its narrative. And that was far more dangerous. As the plane began its descent into JFK, the city lights glittered like scattered stars. Malcolm gazed out the window, reflective. In just a few hours, he'd be sitting across from Altura's executive board with every piece of evidence neatly organized. Every infraction is time-stamped. Every moment of bias is ready for public scrutiny. He wasn't just going to demand policy reform. He was going to install it. He tapped one last message to Tina. "Prepare a full board briefing. Include all footage. Legal holds confirmed. Delay public release. I want to speak first." She responded immediately. "Understood. PR standing by. Executives are already sweating." Renee reached across the aisle again. "You've been so calm." "How?" Malcolm exhaled. "Because I've had to be. My whole life." She nodded slowly, then said, "When this story goes public, what do you want people to understand?" Malcolm looked at her with quiet intensity. That bread and water weren't just a meal. They were a mirror. And now, it's time this industry saw itself. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it sits in silence, watching, remembering, documenting. And when it speaks, it doesn't ask for justice. It delivers it. Malcolm Hayes hadn't just revealed his identity. He had revealed theirs. The tires hit the tarmac with a screech, but the real impact came after. Because when Malcolm Hayes stood up from seat 2A, he wasn't just another black man with a grievance, he was the storm corporate America never saw coming. The wheels kissed the runway at JFK with a jolt, jarring the passengers from their thoughts. Some clapped. Others began collecting coats, powering on phones. But in row 2, silence lingered. Malcolm Hayes remained seated, back straight, face calm. He didn't rush. Because for the first time in 6 hours, it was the crew who felt the urgency, not him. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Claudia stood frozen near the front galley, her smile gone. Her hands shook as she reached for the intercom to begin the standard landing script. But her voice wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." Behind her, Lars barely looked up from the safety checklist. He had stopped making eye contact altogether. Across the aisle, Renee Wallace was already preparing her follow-up article. She had more than enough to publish the first exposé, but she waited for one more act. She sensed it wasn't over. And she was right. From the tarmac, black SUVs idled near Gate 27, a non-commercial terminal entrance. Two figures stood just outside the airport doors: Vanessa Mitchell, Skynova's head of security, and Tina Monroe, Malcolm's executive assistant. Both were dressed in dark suits, holding tablets. Both had seen the footage. And both were ready. Tina's phone buzzed. Touchdown confirmed. Proceeding to the conference suite. Legal and PR ready. Vanessa nodded toward the gate. "Let's clean this up." Back on the plane, the seatbelt light pinged off. Passengers stood, stretching limbs, retrieving overhead bags. But not Malcolm. He stayed seated, eyes calmly tracking Claudia's movements as she walked back and forth, avoiding his gaze like it might burn through her carefully crafted career. Lars finally stepped toward him, hesitant. "Mr. Hayes," he began, voice low, "security is waiting just outside. They'll escort you privately. Also, I wanted to say." Malcolm raised a hand slightly. "Let it go, Lars. I already saw what matters." Lars nodded, embarrassed. "I should have done more." "Maybe," Malcolm said. "But you still have time to decide what you'll do next." The cabin door opened with a mechanical hiss. The usual jet bridge was bypassed. Instead, two plainclothed security officers stepped in and walked straight to Malcolm. "Mr. Hayes," one of them said quietly. "We're ready for you." Malcolm stood, gathered his tablet, and offered a final glance at Claudia, who now looked smaller than ever. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg. But Malcolm simply said, "Your file is complete," and walked past her. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Malcolm stepped into the SUV, flanked by Vanessa and Tina. The doors closed, muting the terminal behind them. Tina handed him a folder. Internal reports. Legal memos. Full employee record pulls. Vanessa added, "We've isolated cabin audio with timestamps." The slur from Hollander, Claudia's fake log entry, Lars's attempted redaction, every piece is solid. Malcolm nodded. "And the board?" "Waiting," Tina said. "Conference room secured." Malcolm looked out the window at the glimmering terminal lights. "They wanted a show," he said. "Let's give them one." Inside Altura Air's Manhattan headquarters, the tension could be felt through the carpeted floors. In the executive conference suite on the 48th floor, a dozen men and women in tailored suits sat stiffly at the long mahogany table. At the head sat Richard Halperin, Altura's CEO. Red-faced. Sweating lightly. Jaw clenched. Behind him were three department heads, HR, PR, and legal, none of whom had slept much in the last 12 hours. At exactly 9 a.m., the doors opened. Malcolm Hayes stepped inside. Behind him, Tina. Vanessa. Renee Wallace. The journalist's presence caused a stir. Whispers erupted. "Why is there media here?" one executive barked. "She's not media today," Malcolm said evenly. "She's a witness." Malcolm didn't sit. He stood at the front of the room and placed his tablet on the table. Then he connected it to the conference screen. What followed was methodical and merciless. He played footage from the cabin. Claudia is serving champagne to rows 1, 3, and 4. Skipping row 2A. The dry bread and water landed with a thud. Her voice, "This meal fits you." The galley chatter, "He probably expected fried chicken." Lars's silent compliance. Hollander's comment, "Should have taken him off before takeoff." The room fell into a stunned silence. Richard cleared his throat. "We're deeply disturbed by this. But surely we can resolve it, privately." Malcolm looked at him, cold. "You think I endured this to negotiate behind closed doors?" He turned to the screen again. Then he displayed their names. Claudia Rivers. Captain James Hollander. Lars Whitman. Beside each name, the words, "terminated immediately." HR Director Margaret Lane protested. "We'll need union protocol." "They'll be walked out before the press conference at noon," Malcolm said. "Their names are already trending. I'm not letting this airline turn them into martyrs." PR raised a hand. "Malcolm, may I ask, what's your objective?" Malcolm stared at him. "My objective is not revenge," he said. "It's precedent." He paced slowly, commanding the room. "For decades, airlines have treated discrimination as customer relations, OT human rights. I'm not issuing vouchers. I'm issuing a change." He tapped his tablet again. "Effective immediately. Independent ethics audits across all flights. Body cams in first-class cabins. Anonymous DEI surveys for all staff. Passenger incident reviews escalated directly to an oversight board." He paused. "And one more thing, every Altura crew member will be retrained. From scratch." A murmur erupted. "We can't afford that," someone said. "You can't afford not to," Malcolm replied. Richard Halperin finally stood. "What if we don't agree to these terms?" Malcolm leaned in slightly. "Then I pull the merger. I walk." And tomorrow, the Post publishes a full-page exposé with video evidence. Hashtag bread and water flight becomes hashtag Altura collapse. He let that settle. "And every one of you answers to the shareholders." No one spoke. Renee smiled to herself. Malcolm finally sat down. "I don't need a vote. I need your signatures. Or your resignations." Richard looked at the others. Then he picked up a pen. "Justice doesn't end at the gate. It lands, walks into the boardroom, and rewrites the rules. And when power shows up prepared, it doesn't ask for change. It delivers it." Malcolm Hayes had landed. Now it was their turn to brace for impact. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Because when Malcolm Hayes walked out of that boardroom, the ground behind him began to crack, and the echoes would reach thousands of miles beyond Gate 27. By 12:03 p.m., the press conference had begun. It wasn't held at the usual Altura Air podium inside Terminal 4. Malcolm had chosen a different backdrop, his own. Skynova's downtown innovation center, where tech and transparency walked hand in hand. The white marble floors gleamed under LED lights. Behind the podium was a massive screen flashing two words. Dignity Standard, activated. Reporters filled every seat. News vans circled the block. And trending globally on every platform was one phrase. Hashtag bread and water flight. Malcolm stepped up to the mic without fanfare. His dark navy suit was crisp, understated. No entourage. No theatrics. Just clarity. "Good afternoon," he began. "Yesterday, I was denied a meal on a flight. But more importantly, I was denied recognition. And I've come to tell you that this wasn't about a slice of bread." He paused. The room was silent. This was about culture. He let that word hang. Altura Air's crew didn't see a CEO. They didn't even see a paying customer. They saw someone who didn't fit their idea of who belonged in first class. And they acted on it. Casually. Repeatedly. Publicly. He tapped the screen behind him. It changed to a still image, a tray with a slice of bread and a plastic cup of water. Gasps rippled through the audience. Then came the video, a now viral clip recorded by another passenger. Claudia Rivers, leaning in and saying, "This meal fits you." The footage stopped. Malcolm continued. This moment sparked outrage because it was familiar. So many people, black, brown, Muslim, disabled, LGBTQ+, have stories just like this one. What was different here was that it was documented. From the inside. He stepped away from the podium and pointed to the screen again. This is what embedded accountability looks like. Renee Wallace, seated in the second row, was already live tweeting. Malcolm Hayes doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. The weight of truth is heavier than sound. Hashtag dignity standard, hashtag flight 762, hashtag bread and water flight. Meanwhile, across the country, Claudia Rivers sat in her apartment, curtains drawn. Her phone had died hours earlier from too many alerts. Her name was now a digital wildfire, photos, headlines, comment threads filled with rage and ridicule. One clip had 8.3 million views, her placing that tray in front of Malcolm. She had tried calling Altura HR. No one picked up. Then tried Lars. No answer. And then, like a final twist of irony, the doorbell rang. A courier. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside, one letter. A termination notice. And below it, 2 lines. Employment concluded. Behavior inconsistent with the new dignity standard. Skynova Ethics Division. She sank to the floor. Back in New York, Captain Hollander met with a very different fate. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He simply walked into the Federal Arbitration Office with a high-priced union lawyer and tried to fight back. "It's all circumstantial," his lawyer barked. "There's no conclusive evidence that my client engaged in willful discrimination." Then Malcolm's legal rep, Vanessa Mitchell, tapped a button on her tablet. A cockpit recording played aloud. "We should have taken him off before takeoff." Silence. Then another. "Keep him happy till we land. And delete the log." The arbitrator raised an eyebrow. "Anything to add, Captain?" Hollander stared ahead, red-faced. "Decision issued. License suspended pending federal review." In the days that followed, the ripple effects exploded. 5 more passengers came forward, each with similar accounts from previous flights with Claudia or Hollander. An ex-flight attendant posted anonymously, confirming that bread and water was sometimes used to humiliate passengers who looked disruptive. Stock in Altura Air dropped 13% in 48 hours. Dozens of crew members quietly emailed Skynova's new ethics hotline, reporting their observations of bias, finally feeling safe to speak. The Altura board, under intense pressure, released a public apology. But it was too little. Malcolm had already shifted the narrative. At a closed internal town hall, Malcolm addressed the company's 11,000 employees via live stream. He stood in front of a simple banner: every passenger. Every flight. No exceptions. He didn't scold. He didn't threaten. He told a story. About his father being mistaken for a janitor at a university where he was the keynote speaker. About his mother being forced to show ID in a store she'd shopped at for 20 years. About himself, being offered a janitor's jumpsuit at the valet station of a hotel he owned shares in. Then he said, "You don't have to wear a uniform to be in customer service. You just have to have power. And when you have it, you have a choice." At the end of the week, Skynova released its first official policy brief under the Dignity Standard. It included mandatory DEI recertification for all flight crew, quarterly anonymous passenger equity surveys, hidden audit flights operated by third-party testers, automatic review for any crew that receives multiple same-category complaints within 6 months, a new crew ranking system where bias-free performance impacts promotions. It was bold. And it was binding. But for Malcolm, the most powerful moment came not from a press conference or a policy. It came from a short email, 3 lines long. From lars.whitman@alcherair.com. Subject: Thank you. You were right. Silence is complicity. I'll testify if needed. Lars. The next day, Malcolm visited a charter school in Harlem. The students didn't care about mergers or boardroom drama. But they did care about fairness. A young girl raised her hand. "Is it true they only gave you bread and water?" He nodded. "It is." "What did you do?" "I didn't yell," Malcolm said. "I recorded. I remembered. And I changed the system." The girl blinked. "Can I do that one day?" Malcolm smiled. "You can do more than that. You can build a world where it never happens again. Fallout isn't destruction, it's exposure. When injustice is brought to light, it doesn't burn the world down. It reveals where we must rebuild." And Malcolm Hayes wasn't just rebuilding an airline. He was rebuilding trust. Some revolutions don't begin with marches. They begin quietly, with a slice of bread, a plastic cup of water, and a man who refused to let indignity become routine. It was a Monday morning when Malcolm Hayes boarded his next flight. A different route. A different destination. But this time, everything had changed. The airline, formerly Alchera Air, had been rebranded under Skynova's Equity First vision. From uniforms to protocols, from gate agents to captains, every touch point had undergone review. The Dignity Standard wasn't just a slogan, it was now printed on the back of every crew badge. As Malcolm stepped into the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was palpably different. The smiles were genuine. The service was even. And the tray in front of seat 2A bore not bread and water, but a complete menu, a handwritten welcome card, and a quiet, respectful greeting. "Mr. Hayes, we're honored to have you aboard. Please let us know how we can make this flight memorable for the right reasons." Outside, the world hadn't forgotten. The hashtag bread and water flight movement had outgrown its origins. It was now a national conversation about implicit bias, corporate accountability, and the quiet ways discrimination shows up, and how it can be dismantled. At universities, professors added the case to business ethics and media studies curricula. At HR seminars, companies dissected the policy rollout Skynova had pioneered. And in living rooms across America, people shared their own stories. Some heartbreaking. Some enraging. All real. A culture of awareness was forming, built not on outrage, but on reckoning. Renee Wallace's long-form piece, When Silence Lands, won a National Press Award. In it, she didn't just tell Malcolm's story. She told the stories of those who had been denied basic human courtesy, not just on planes, but in hospitals, schools, and boardrooms. Her conclusion read: "What Malcolm Hayes did wasn't retaliation. It was a revelation. He didn't burn the system down. He showed us the cracks. And in doing so, gave us all a blueprint for repair." But the most powerful ripple wasn't in boardrooms or media awards. It was in the mail. Malcolm received thousands of letters, handwritten, typed, sometimes scrawled in trembling script, from people who had lived through similar experiences but never had a voice. One stood out. It was from a teenage boy in Atlanta. "Dear Mr. Hayes. I'm 15. I want to be a pilot one day. But one time, a teacher told me to pick a dream that fits people like me. After I saw your story, I told him. Mr. Hayes flies higher than you can see. Now I know I can too. Thank you." Malcolm read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, placed it inside his notebook, and carried it with him from that day forward. In a keynote address at the International Aviation Equity Forum, Malcolm stood before a packed hall of executives and regulators. The backdrop behind him displayed only 4 words. "Respect is non-negotiable." He began. "I didn't set out to become the face of airline reform. I didn't want a hashtag. I wanted dinner. I wanted dignity. And I wanted to see what your staff would do when they thought I was no one important." The audience sat frozen. What I saw wasn't surprising. But it was sobering. Because when discrimination is systemic, it doesn't scream. It shrugs. And it does its damage in silence. He continued. "The only reason we're here today is because it was caught on tape. But how many people don't get the chance to capture their moment? How many walk away doubting their worth instead of changing the system?" He paused. Then asked. "So here's my challenge. What if the next time someone is treated poorly, not for what they did, but for who they are, one of us speaks up? Not later. Not on social media. In that moment. Because when silence ends, justice begins." The hall erupted in applause. But Malcolm didn't smile. He simply nodded, because he knew the applause wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Months later, Claudia Rivers resurfaced, not as a villain in another story, but as a cautionary voice in corporate workshops. To the surprise of many, she joined a restorative justice program facilitated by Skynova's equity division. She didn't excuse her actions. She admitted them. And in a video now used in training modules, she looked directly into the camera and said, "I thought I was just doing my job. I didn't realize how many people I was hurting. But the truth is, I had choices. I made the wrong ones. Now, I want to help others make better ones." Even Lars, once a silent bystander, was promoted. Not back into cabin service, but into Skynova's internal auditing team. His new mission, visit random flights each month, not to judge, but to observe and help rebuild from within. At a cruise summit, when asked why he stayed, he said, "Because someone gave me a second chance. And I want to be the person I wasn't brave enough to be that day." On the anniversary of the merger, Malcolm returned to JFK Terminal 4, not to fly, but to unveil a new installation at Gate 27. A glass case stood at the center of the waiting lounge. Inside was a replica of the tray he had received. Dry bread. Plastic cup. Silver nameplate underneath. The moment that changed everything. Beside it, a plaque. "This is not a display of shame. It is a reminder. Of what happens when we dehumanize. Of what's possible when we choose differently." MH. People lined up to take photos. Others stood in quiet reflection. One child looked up at his mother and asked, "Why is that bread in a museum?" She answered, "Because it was more than bread." Life lessons from The Bread and Water Flight, a message for you. Malcolm Hayes' journey reminds us that injustice doesn't always scream. It whispers in quiet moments of exclusion, in the indifference of routine, in the silence of those who choose not to see. What began as a simple flight became a turning point, not just for one man, but for an entire system. The real lesson here is that dignity should never be conditional. Whether you wear a suit or sneakers, sit in coach or first class, you deserve to be treated with humanity and respect. This story also teaches us that you don't need power to make change, you need clarity, courage, and the will to act. Malcolm didn't retaliate, he documented, strategized, and reformed. And in doing so, he reminded us that even in a world stacked with inequality, truth, when paired with action, can rebuild systems from the inside out. So, to everyone who's ever been overlooked, dismissed, or judged, you are not invisible. To everyone who witnesses injustice and stays silent, you have more power than you think. If this message resonates with you, like this video. If you believe more people need to hear it, share it. And if you want to be part of a growing community that turns stories into action, subscribe to the channel. Because the world doesn't change with outrage. It changes when people like you decide, enough is enough.